Hi, I'm Steph Strickland with GeekWire Studios. I'm your host for Does Compute, the podcast where we delve into the latest innovations in computer science with the help from experts at Carnegie Mellon University School of Computer Science. I want to introduce you right now to Chris Donahue, an assistant professor at CMU, working at the intersection of music, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. His goal, simply stated, but a really big topic, is to develop and responsibly deploy generative AI for music and creativity. We're going to come back to that many, many times in this conversation. He leads the Generative Creativity Lab in CMU's School of Computer Science. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Great. I'm doing well. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
It's so funny to take something as complicated as what you do and simplify it to a sentence. You say it and then you think, wait a minute, we have so many things to unpack. Let's start by laying the foundation for the work that you do at CMU. Tell me about the Generative Creativity Lab.
Yeah, so the Generative Creativity Lab is me and a group of PhD students, and our goal is to understand and help shape the relationship that AI might play in the creative musical process. We really try to center our research with a strong emphasis on human creativity, using AI to build tools that help humans be more creative. Continuing to think of us as the key kind of central focus of the creative process. Different like parts of the spectrum of musical expertise. We try to build tools for musicians to kind of expand the boundaries of creative possibilities, and we also build tools for non-musicians, for amateurs that try to sort of lower the barrier to entry to creative musical expression.
I will come back to that because it's an interesting aspect of the debate that sometimes gets lost when we talk about AI's role in creating art or creating music. But in the short term, because you are talking about music, you're a musician yourself. Tell me about the path so that people understand where you came from to get into this line of work.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a long story. I'll try to keep it not too long. So I come from a musical family. My parents actually met in music school at Boston Conservatory. Though neither of them finished music school. Ironically, they went on and did other things. But yeah, so I was always interested in music. I started taking piano lessons from a very young age, and was sort of classically trained for 15 years. I also studied percussion performance in middle school and high school. And so, yeah, always sort of, my entire childhood, always doing something with music, but also sort of always surrounded by computers growing up. My dad eventually became a computer engineer. And so, I always, kind of grew up with computers and learning how to program them and building websites for friends and things like that. And yeah, when I was, at the precipice of deciding what I wanted to do for a college degree, I was kind of torn between music and computer science, and ultimately chose to pursue computer science. While I was an undergrad, I sort of, kind of continued to pursue both interests separately. I was focusing on my CS coursework, but also playing in local bands. I went to UT Austin. There's a great live music scene there, and I would gig with local bands, and that was, I think, when I really kind of fell in love with music. Like, music had always been a part of my life, but when it kind of went from being this kind of solo, more prescriptive thing, like, here's a piece of sheet music, learn to play it, execute these instructions with some embellishment. When it went from that to, like, oh, now I'm with a group of friends, kind of jamming and creating together, and it became very open ended and exploratory. Like that, that's when I really kind of became really passionate about music. And so, yeah, this all culminated at the end of undergrad with taking a course on computer music, sort of the intersection of music and the research area, which is at the intersection of music and computation. And that was just, immediately an aha moment for me. And I decided to sort of pursue that passion, for graduate studies.
I'll be your hype guy. I'll also mention that you have perfect pitch because I know you won't want to say it, but you do. And it is interesting in the sense that in a lot of cases, if you are of the mindset that you cultivate perfect pitch, the training that you had as a kid playing the piano was probably integral to you developing that as a skill set, not to mention the innate ability to do so in the first place. Where this comes into play in the broader conversation is something you just mentioned, riffing with your buddies in
Hmm.
Austin, creating music. For people who have a creative bent or want to communicate through music, there is often a barrier if you're not a musician and you did not have the benefit of your parents forcing you to do piano lessons.
Right.
Most kids, right?
Which is often resented at the time, but yeah, like,
But it
but
made a
eventually
huge
it becomes
difference
such
for
an
you.
what? Of
It made a huge difference for you,
course,
that
yes,
that
yes,
training.
yes.
So then the question becomes, how does the work that you've done in the creative space, your ability to riff, made you want to include non-musicians and utilize AI tools to have them be a part of this creative process?
Yeah, definitely. It played a huge direct influence. Like you said, like I was, very fortunate to be able to study music for multiple decades, to receive, lessons from amazing teachers, and yeah, like I recognize how lucky I was to be able to pursue kind of conventional formal music education. And yeah, and having that sort of creative outlet has always just been so important to me, and such, like, a part of who I am. Um and yeah, I like, but music in particular is just something that has this like extremely high barrier to entry. It takes often years of training to kind of even be able to do anything that is like creatively satisfying. And so yeah, I'm really, one of the things I'm excited about with AI is that we potentially do have the ability to kind of allow people to take a musical idea that may be in their head and actually express that idea, as sound that they can hear and then share with their friends. So yeah, that's one of the sort of driving motivations behind a lot of my research is kind of improving that access, and letting more people into the creative musical conversation.
Starting with the fun stuff and then getting into some of the nitty gritty considerations that you've touched on. Tell me about Hookpad Arya.
Oh yeah, Hookpad Aria. So that's a fairly recent research project. Um, so Aria was is broadly inspired by trends that we're seeing with how programmers are using AI. So I'm a musician. I'm also a computer scientist. So I do a lot of programming, and recently there's been the emergence of AI assistant tools like GitHub Copilot, for example, that are sort of deeply integrated with programming workflows, and allow me as a programmer to sort of have this AI assistant that can help me complete tasks more efficiently, can help me program, or can help me do, like, particularly difficult aspects of programming that I'm not good at, write in languages that I may not even know. And it's just like it's been, as a programmer, it's been sort of just a profound change in how I approach like that practice, and a profoundly positive one. Not only do I like feel more productive when I'm using those tools, I just find programming just much more deeply satisfying, as a consequence of having this AI assistant. Unfortunately, there's a lot of there's a lot of conversations around the intersection of music and AI, and a lot of controversy there. And you know, one of the possible underlying reasons behind that is that musicians AI really hasn't given much to musicians yet. Arguably, that's maybe a controversial take, but yeah, like we, these types of tools like Copilot that exist for programmers don't really exist for musicians. But what if we could, take that same sort of analogy, having an AI assistant tool that is deeply integrated into the creative musical workflow, and kind of let people collaborate with that? Might they feel the same boost of satisfaction and creativity that programmers feel when they use tools like Copilot? So yeah, I haven't actually described really what Aria is yet. So Aria is a Copilot like tool that is deeply integrated into a creative music piece of creative music software called Hookpad Arya, which is a tool that pop songwriters use to compose music lead sheets. Music lead sheets are sort of like the essence of a pop song. They're the melody that you might whistle when thinking about that song, and the harmony, and the rhythm and things like that. So Aria basically kind of understands lead sheets and allows musicians to kind of query this AI assistant to suggest, continuations of the musical material they're writing, or to fill in gaps that maybe they're having trouble connecting one idea to another idea. So yeah, it's a very sort of direct analogy to tools like Copilot, except designed in a bespoke way for musicians and for songwriters that use Hookpad.
You know you're in a very engaging field when you describe something and it immediately kicks off about six other different directions you could go with a line of questioning. I think I want to tackle some of the important nuts and bolts first because it will inform the nature of the discussion to follow. And that is specifically centered around copyright.
Hmm.
No one out there who spends any time either paying attention to the music industry or certainly what's also going on in Hollywood has missed the news that for recording labels, they're very keen on copyright protection and protecting funding streams. That also then trickles down to musicians who are also out there saying we need to protect our own funding streams. How does this play into this idea of either AI assisted creation or complete AI creation for someone with no musical training whatsoever?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, sort of copyright, kind of a critically important and wide open question in the music AI conversation. Even more broadly, like music and copyright have had a long and litigious history together. Yeah, and I think honestly, like a sort of an asterisk to put on right at the outset of this conversation is that the music AI research community, I think, was really broadly caught off guard by how quickly these systems started being able to generate things that you know could potentially compete for like listener attention, like be actually things that people wanted to listen to that you might even hear on the radio, or on a music streaming service. Um, and so yeah, I certainly don't have all the answers yet with regards to music AI and copyright, and I'm starting to sort of formulate my own sort of principles and ideas here. Yeah, so maybe one important caveat or one important sort of distinction I want to make sooner rather than later is the distinction between sort of music as a product, like something music as you see it when you open Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. This kind of you know this pre-recorded content that you engage with, that you consume. Obviously, I'm not trying to demean the commercial music industry. This is obviously I love recorded music and listening to music, but that's an incomplete view of what music is. Music is also very much a rich process, a creative act, something where the creative, like the process itself, has strong intrinsic value. People will create music even if they have no intention of sharing it. I love playing the piano myself and just improvising with no intention of that ever being recorded or, you know, sent to any, or even have me listen to it again. Yeah, so I think one important distinction is that I think while copyright is important to kind of protect, when we're thinking about AI, it's important to kind of consider copyright for both of these kind of branches of music, if you will. But I think the copyright questions become much more strongly centered in the kind of product view of music. Like when you're generating full songs that might sort of directly compete with revenue streams that artists already have, that's a very different question, I think, when versus like when you're talking about copyright for the purposes of building tools that actually integrate more deeply with the creative process and allow people to kind of use those tools to create new things and be more creative.
Let's chase both of those. Let's start with the one that impacts the final product, the product of music. So I'm thinking in terms of a background music in a movie or a song that you might download. Talk to me a little bit about some of the ideas of compensating artists in the future as it might pertain to how AI models are trained on their data. And perhaps that touches both, but I'll leave that to you to help me understand the difference.
Yeah, definitely. Um, right. So on a few different things buzzing in my head. So firstly, I want to talk about sort of the kind of research questions that emerge in this space, which I think like are the things I tend to focus on most closely because that's sort of where my expertise lies. Um, a key kind of central question, not that is certainly broader than music, but very much in focus within the music AI conversation is do we really need to reach a better understanding of how training data for these AI systems actually influences generated outputs, like how like the underlying mechanics of how you go from point A, a training data set, to point B, a generated output. Um, and and so, the better we can understand this, I think just broadly, the better we can sort of draw connections to existing economic models in music that are centered around sort of direct kind of reuse or influence. So, for example, we have revenue models, existing revenue models in music around things like sampling, like literally extracting a sample of a recording for the purpose of sort of creatively repurposing that sample in a new kind of piece of music. And I'm hopeful that if we can reach a better understanding of how training data actually influences the output of these AI models, that we could potentially directly draw analogies to some of these existing revenue streams that are sort of already beneficial to artists. And a key factor here is it's in my mind critically important that sort of revenue that is kind of redirected to people creating the training data is scales proportionally to the revenue that these music AI systems create themselves. And I think that sort of attribution and understanding the influence of training data and generated outputs is at the center of kind of making some of these economic models sustainable for artists.
There's a whole nother can of worms that opened up in my brain about watermarking and all of those things that just are, well, we don't have 20 hours for this. So with that said, then you've addressed the conceptual challenges that are ahead. I don't know that anyone was on, you say, caught off guard. I don't think anyone was prepared for how rapidly this scaled across multiple different outputs, both creatively and mathematically, computationally. It's incredible that we're having this robust of a conversation for something that you were in the deep learning space in what, 2018, and now
Yeah,
here we are.
yeah,
So
yeah.
let me talk a little bit about deep learning and some of the first work that you did, because it at the time it was pretty revolutionary. You were basically you were using deep learning to create some basic sounds that the human ear could understand. Tell me about that initial work.
Yeah, definitely. So this goes back a little bit. I'm tempted to give another history lesson about my past influences. I will do this because I think it is relevant. So I was originally really drawn to the research field of computer music by like one kind of key uh, technology, which was the development of a synthesis method called frequency modulation, or FM synthesis. FM synthesis was developed by a computer science researcher, John Chowning at Stanford, and this is like someone sitting in a lab thinking about how we can get computers um, to synthesize richer music sounds more efficiently. And that kind of basic research question turned into just like this dramatic cultural revolution or shift in popular music. So that technology was like licensed and incorporated into commercial synthesizers like the Yamaha DX7. It became kind of the sound of the 80s. Like, if you picture like a cheesy 80s synth riff, that's almost certainly FM synthesis. And so I was just really deeply inspired by how like you could come up with a new kind of algorithm or new piece of music technology and have it just dramatically, or like create a kind of new way of creating new sounds and have it sort of dramatically affect music culture. And so yeah, as a PhD student in like 2015, early 2015, 2016, I was really kind of obsessed with like trying to find like the next FM synthesis, like trying to find a new technology that would create new sounds. And I was a little bit disappointed to learn that a lot of it's really hard. It's not clear that there is another like FM synthesis out there that would sort of unlock this new broad category of sounds. But I was really inspired by a lot of the early work I was seeing in what is now referred to as generative AI, I guess, for image generation. We were starting to see generative adversarial networks be capable of generating images that looked somewhat like things you would actually see in the real world. I was particularly inspired by a paper, a DC GAN by Alec Radford in 2016, I want to say, where he created this model that could generate these like weird trippy pictures of like bedroom scenes basically. And I was like, oh, what would that sound like? Like that seems like maybe a way I could create like a compelling new category of sounds, because they weren't like quite real. There was almost like a beauty in the fact that they weren't good yet, and I really wanted to hear what that sounded like. So yeah, that's a little bit of background. So that brought me to this project called WaveGAN, which was sort of an attempt to see if we could use this generative uh, learning algorithm, generative adversarial networks, to be able to generate kind of audio that was recognizable. And yeah, so that was a really fun project. And one of the fun stories that came out of that was one of the categories of sounds that we were trying to model was bird sounds, or like bird vocalizations. And I remember like the moment I realized that this was actually working was when I was showing my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, um, uh, uh, initial generations of like generated bird sounds. And one of her roommate's cats came like bursting into the room. And this was a very shy cat. Like I almost never saw this cat at their apartment, and very clearly convinced by these generated bird vocalizations, and so yeah, I felt like I had passed the purring test, which was a really fun moment there.
We need the but because you said purring test. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that I will say, all of this work exists on your website. So for people who want to hear what the early iteration of that sounds like, you can go check it out. The human speech constructs really, they itch your brain, for me uncomfortably, because it doesn't sound like another spoken language, but it sounds like language, and I cannot understand it. It feels like a fever dream, much like those early trippy pictures of
yeah.
bedroom scenes. It really does. So I encourage you to go check it out on Chris's website. So now that we've covered where we were in 2018, and now we're having full on conversations with Chat GPT, let's talk more about AI music and the potential challenges of having AI contribute to the creative process. I might feel individually engaged, but what's happening on the broader picture? Walk me through that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So yeah, one of the kind of interesting nuances of building AI systems that might integrate into the creative process is that Um, so take Aria for example, which is this co-pilot tool that we specifically designed for musicians, and now there are thousands of musicians using it. When I engage with Aria on Hookpad, like when I try to write a pop song and have Aria like help me do that composition, I'm sort of struck by this experience of when I ask it, when I've written a couple bars of music and I'm a little bit stuck and I want to know where to go next, I'll ask Aria for a suggestion or two, and it'll generate something that I never would have thought of, which is like as a musician just so exciting. It's like, oh, like that's really cool. I think a lot of musicians kind of like resent their own tendencies when they're writing music, even if other people really love their style. We're always kind of looking for ways to like break our patterns and create new things, and it feels like these tools kind of potentially give us that capability on an individual level in a similar way to where when we're writing music with other people, they might challenge our ideas and suggest things that we wouldn't have thought of. So that's really exciting. But there's this kind of weird uh, ironic thing that on the macro, like while it on the micro level, this might help people kind of expand their boundaries of creativity, thinking about like people's creative spheres as like dots in some landscape, some 2D landscape. But on a kind of macro level, this technology might actually be sort of pushing everyone to the same point. Like it might be sort of pushing everyone towards doing things that sound like everyone else, because we're all sort of using this technology together. Um, and yeah, it's challenging to understand, to comprehend, especially if you just see this micro view where it's like, surely this technology is helping me be more creative and expand my boundaries. But from a bird's eye view, that sort of might be sort of shrinking the population level diversity of what people are making. So yeah, I'm really interested in studying this. We haven't sort of we've started sort of analyzing data from Arya to kind of see if we can see any of these trends, although this is still sort of a nascent investigation, and we haven't necessarily reached any conclusions yet. But yeah, it's a fascinating research question.
What are some of the things that get you excited in the space from truly acknowledging your mission, which is creativity and expanding human creativity and using AI for good?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I'm sort of most acutely excited about, or the trend that I'm sort of most acutely excited about in music AI right now, is that we are sort of on the precipice of being able to have music AI systems that generate in truly in real time, and that people can potentially use in a way similar to how we use music, like traditional musical instruments. So one thing to understand here is that, like, in musical create like real time responsiveness is like at the kind of core of musical creativity. Like, since the invention of musical instruments, we have this like strongly imbued expectation that when we touch something, when we pluck a string, we sort of immediately hear the response. And the creative musical experience, when you're writing songs, is sort of a fundamentally real time one, where you're sort of noodling around on a guitar in real time, coming up with your ideas, maybe writing those ideas down and revisiting them, but the creativity happens in this sort of real time loop. Um, and so far, with regards to AI technology, we haven't really had that interaction paradigm basically at all, because these models are so large and require so much computation. We have not yet really had the ability to actually interact with them in sort of a conventional real time setting. And thanks to a lot of recent sort of advancements in like machine learning systems, learning how to take very large models and execute them in real time, even on like sort of a piece of commodity hardware like a MacBook or something like that. We're sort of at the a dawn of seeing a lot of really fascinating tools where people can truly interact with an AI system in real time, control it like a musical instrument. And I'm super super excited to see what musicians do when they get their hands on that type of technology.
And on the flip side, for lay people like myself, there's interesting work even in something that drives my daughter absolutely wild, which is when my GPS interrupts my song to tell me I need to make a turn. And it's always at just the right time in the song when she's emotionally invested. Chris, before I get to my final question, tell me a little bit about what you're envisioning in this space as it pertains from a layperson perspective for something like that.
Yeah, so I think you're referencing a recent research project that I worked on with a wonderfully talented student, Alex Wang, who built an AI system that can take a sort of spoken notification, something from Siri or Google Assistant on your phone, and kind of tailor that spoken notification in such a way that it sounds like something that's being sung along with the song that you're maybe already listening to. So you could be driving and have an AI system, sing that you should be taking a left on Bartlett Street or something like that. Along with whatever song that you're listening to. So yeah, I'm in addition to sort of like thinking about music and AI as a kind of a creative tool for either musicians, non-musicians, what have you. I'm also really just generally excited about the potential for music for AI to make to kind of transform music listening from this sort of static, context independent experience into a more dynamic and context dependent one. I think there's a lot of really interesting potential to sort of make music more responsive, have it adjust to what's happening in the world. Have your music respond to your exercise. Speed up at an intense times of your exercise and things like that. And I also and so yeah, really excited about those types of applications. Also, really important to me there that we kind of give control of those modifications to artists, allow art like build tools that allow artists to control how their music might be modified such that it is sort of like in line with their creative intentions.
Do you think that AI can eventually produce music on its own that conveys the depth of the human experience in the notes that we hear and how we react to what we're being presented?
Uh, I want to say like fundamentally, so I think it is the case. You don't want to bet against AI's ability to do anything these days. I mean, I think like again, we're all sort of struck in the research community by how quickly this technology is developing. So I don't I do believe that at some point AI systems will be able to generate a waveform that like evokes the same kinds of captivating interests that human created music currently does. We're maybe already starting to see that happen. Like people have used generative AI systems to create music that has gone viral and captured people's imaginations. But the caveat here is that ultimately it's still sort of a human intentionality driving those systems that is going to continue to be the focus of sort of the foreground of the human music experience. I do think that like we'll see a lot of AI tools start to kind of or AI generated music be used, as sort of background music for advertising and things like that. But when it comes to the types of music that people want to listen to on a day to day basis, and that sort of inspires them or provokes emotional responses, like I do genuinely believe that that humans will always be at the center of that creative practice.
I look forward to someday owning a record of AI music. I think that would be an incredible full circle moment. Chris, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no, it was really wonderful talking to you, Steph. I appreciate your time as well.
You've been watching Does Compute, the podcast that delves into how computer science is building useful stuff that works. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. I'm Steph Strickland with GeekWire Studios.